What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining our monthly webinar. This is one I'm really excited about because I just went through a safety audit with my insurance company, Van Liner. And if you guys know them, they usually do one every year. And they pretty much tore us apart. And, my ops manager let me down in a few things. And I just found out that I can cure that problem with MyFleet.AI. So I'm going to introduce John Davis here. John Davis is the COO and co founder of MyFleet.AI. John is a highly experienced risk manager and safety consultant with over 35 years in the trucking industry. John has dedicated himself to helping trucking companies improve their safety practices and reduce the risk of accidents and injuries on the road. He has expertise in compliance, training, and risk assessment and is highly skilled in developing and implementing effective safety programs. John has also served as an instructor teaching risk management and safety courses to professionals in the field. Welcome, John, for one. Thank you for being here. And this is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to deal with or talk about in their moving business. We're worried about booking jobs, servicing jobs, making money, and making customers happy. The last thing we want to worry about is safety, but it's kind of the biggest thing that can take you out quicker than anything. So we really need to put some focus on it. And let's hear what John has to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's really, there's a lot of nuances to this industry that gets motor carriers in trouble just because of what is, we're operating box trucks and, a lot of our drivers don't have CDL licenses. Then it goes into overweight and causes a lot of issues. So I'm going to cover a lot of these different things in here of what I see, not only from a regulatory compliance side, but also from insurance companies, because I used to work for these insurance companies. I used to do the audits that Chad was just talking about, and I would see the same problem over and over again. And it's just, I focus on workflows and on the paperwork documents and things like that, and that's what I'll cover. So in this presentation, I'm really focused more on the operations with box trucks because this is where a lot of the issues come in. So we may have operations that are attending today that have tractor trailers and I got my CDL drivers and things like that. I'm really talking about the pitfalls with this type of operation that is leasing, renting trucks through Penske Enterprise. I got non-CDL drivers and things like that. I will talk about the regulations in this, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, okay, the regulation says you don't have to do this stuff, but it may be a better practice to do that stuff because of insurance requirements and things like that. So the big question is, I have box trucks, whether they're 26 footers or 28 footers, and I've got my gross vehicle weight plate on the side, and it says 26,000 pounds. I don't need a CDL driver in here. But what I want you to understand with the regulations is the regulations kick in on certain things at 10,001 pounds. So this is where my, moving household good companies get in trouble is they don't realize that between that 10,001 pound vehicle to that 26,000 pound vehicle, you're required to have certain things in place. And, the FMCSA, they could do a new entrance audit. And what that is basically a compliance review within the first 18 to 24 months. You get your DOT number, and within the first 18 to 24 months, they'll come in and do an audit. And what happens a lot of times with this type of operation is we don't have what I'm going to cover in this presentation here, and you can get a conditional rating. And if you get a conditional rating, then what happens from the insurance world is you could have your insurance canceled, you could have your rates go up, you could have a bunch of different things that happen because we didn't understand that really at 10,001 pounds is when certain things start applying to these type of operations. So what are some of those things at 10,001 pounds? Obviously, you got to have a DOT number, um, and where a lot of my operations that I see in here is you got to have a driver qualification file and a medical card on here, and making sure that you have that. So the first problem is you got to know what to have, and the second problem is you got to do a good job at record keeping to make sure that you have this stuff. So when you have an audit, and there's two different types of audits. There's the audit from the FMCSA, and there is an audit from your insurance company. So that's what Chad said. He had an audit from his insurance company. They came in and looked at stuff and said, you need to fix whatever this is. So making sure that we have the right paperwork in place for all of your drivers. And this is the crux of the problem right here. And I handle a bunch of different motor carriers, and give you an example. They have their truck and it's 26,000 pounds, and then they load the truck with the household goods and they weigh it, and it's over 26,000 pounds. So the regulation changes because of that weight being over 26,000 pounds. So you enter a new world as soon as your truck weighs, with the household goods inside of it, more than 26,001 pound. And where I saw it from a DOT compliance issue and the insurance issue was you get these violations on roadside for the driver not having the correct license class, meaning that they needed a CDLB because the truck was over 26,001 pound because of the goods inside of it. So that's where it comes into being a problem is, okay, my driver got pulled over or went through a scale. He's over 26,001 pound. He's got a regular Class E license. He doesn't have a CDLB. The driver's placed out of service. He gets a violation. It goes under your driver fitness basic score for your DOT number, and those start piling up on you. And then your insurance company sees that and they go, well, what are you doing to solve this? Well, here's the crux of the industry is it's harder to hire CDL drivers for these type of operations. My owners tell me, well, I'd love to have CDLB drivers all day long, but what happens is if I go get them their CDLB, then they'll go work somewhere else that pays more or whatever because they have their CDL. So it's a dance between this of what I'm talking about, that all right, if you're going to play the safe game, everybody needs a CDLB, but that's not the reality for our type of operations here, that you just need to be aware of what's going to happen if your driver rolls a scale and you end up over 26,001 pounds because of the contents of the truck. Now, how do you get caught at this? All right. I just told you your driver rolls a scale. They are over 26,001 pounds. That's one way. And then let's talk about a compliance review. They come in and do a compliance review on you, and they start asking for your customer estimates, and you're weighing your loads in there. You're creating the documentation for you to fail your audit because you have all the truck weights in written format that the DOT can get a hold of. So that's problematic in the paper trail there. It's not only the roadside inspections, it's the internal paperwork that can cause issues on that. So the whole picture of this is because of the nature of your operations, working with these box trucks and doing all this, you got the trigger, you don't have the right license, you don't have the right driver qualification file, you don't have the right drug and alcohol program, and a simple roadside inspection at a scale house where you're overweight, okay, you get the ticket for your driver not having the correct license. Then you get a violation because the driver's not in a DOT drug and alcohol testing program. Then you get a violation for not being in the clearinghouse. Uh, you see how this domino effect happens. And the way this works is under your DOT number, under the CSA SMS basic scores. The more violations you get, the more points you get, and the more that your score deteriorates to put you on a radar for an audit. And then that audit causes the conditional rating, those violations and safety ratings go to your insurance company. Then they make business decisions on whether they want to insure you or they don't want to insure you, or they want to raise your rates or not raise your rates. So that's the dilemma that we face on this program right here.
And something I learned from my last audit was once you get to a certain point on your CSA score, that you're going to get inspected every time you go through the weigh station. Like you're on their radar
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to look for anything and everything. So you're putting a target on your back if you're, screwing up too much.
Absolutely. And they have intervention thresholds. And once you get through a certain scoring, then you're going to get pulled in more frequently into those scale houses. That's a very good point
Hmm.
on that. Like I said, it's just a huge domino effect on all of this and it's just really tough with this type of operation for the core problem of I really need CDLB drivers in my seats driving, and it's not always easy to get that accomplished. All right. So 10,001 to 26,000 pounds. Let's stick in that framework here. You've got to have a driver qualification file. The driver has to have a medical card. The regulation up to 26,000 pounds, you don't have to have them enrolled in a DOT approved drug and alcohol program, nor the clearinghouse because they don't have a CDL license. Here's my information on that. If I was your underwriter from your insurance company and they sent me in to do the loss control, I would still want to see that you have a drug and alcohol program, even though you're not required from the regulations to do that. So what do I mean by that? I would go ahead and have a written policy that says this is our pre-hire and random drug policy that you can, you know, get that and then figure out a random testing program. Now, this also has been made problematic from the moving companies that I handle is, if I have a drug and alcohol program, then I can't get drivers to drive for me, and that can be an issue on this. So I understand that, but I'm looking at you to have the best foot forward with your insurance company that when they come and do an audit of you, to go, do you have a drug and alcohol program? Yes. Are you following it? Yes. Do you do random testing? Yes. Do you have documentation of that? Yes. Then you have that, and the insurance company is just one item. The second one is the lawyer on the billboard that is hunting your drivers. That's the biggest problem. So if you don't have that program in place, they have tactics in lawsuits where they're in front of the jury and it's a red herring tactic where they go, well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this driver could have been impaired prior to the accident because they didn't have a drug and alcohol testing program. They didn't do drug and alcohol testing, and they had no way to prevent this. That can turn out very bad in the results of litigation to where you're seeing in headlines that it's an accident and then it turns into a nuclear verdict, meaning it's a multi-million-dollar verdict because you didn't have certain processes in place that could have avoided that. So think about that. Another key thing that is missed with these type of operations is cargo securement. There are certain securement requirements, even though you've got a closed, locked door, that can be inspected. DOT officer can open the door, and if you don't have the sofa strapped down right and you don't have, the cargo secured, then that can be an issue. And then hours of service, and I have a lot to cover on hours of service. All right, for the driver qualification file, you are going to have a DOT compliant driver application. You can do a simple Google search. You don't have to go buy those. You don't have to go to some vendor or anything like that. It is just do a Google search to get a DOT compliant application. What I see in a lot of operations is they'll go to Office Depot or Staples and they'll get a pad of applications. That is not going to fly with the DOT. You cannot do that. So find you a DOT compliant application. That's the first thing you're going to do. And the next thing you can, and again, you can Google this, is get a road test. You have to have a road test on this, and it has to be, the road test has to be completed by a qualified person that knows the operation of that type of vehicle. So if you have CDL drivers and you've got vehicles that have to be CDL, it has to be a CDL driver to give the road test. If it's a non-CDL, then it can be the owner or manager or something like that, but you need to have the documented road test. And then a lot of folks miss the past employment verification for the last 3 years. So the reason you have the DOT employment application is it has on that application, where have you worked for the last 5 years? And the driver fills out that information. And then what your responsibility is you have to call those or email them or different things and try to verify the employment of that driver. And then finally, a motor vehicle record, making sure you do that. A common practice, which is the wrong practice, is when I used to do loss control, I would review a driver qualification file and the owner would tell me, oh, my insurance agent runs the motor vehicle record for me. They have them. That is not sufficient. You have to have a copy in your driver qualification file. That will be a failure on a DOT audit if you don't have that. So you can accomplish this a couple of ways. You can contact your insurance agent saying, hey, I know you're running the MVR on my behalf. Can you send me a copy of it for my driver qualification file? If your insurance agent says, no, I can't do that, then you're going to have to obtain your own motor vehicle record for your jurisdiction to have in your file. Because if I come in and did an audit as a DOT officer and I pull your file and that motor vehicle record's not in there, then it's a non-compliant file. Final thing is a medical card. And that has to be in there, and that's problematic on keeping up with that. If you're a CDL driver, the medical card is automatically certified to the local DMV for the state. In a non-CDL world, that is not the case. So you have to actually have a physical copy of the medical card. You've got to put it in a calendar system with the expiration date and make sure that you track it 90 and 60 days out from when that medical card should be renewed. Because where are we at today post COVID? I just can't go in and get an appointment to get my new medical card. That appointment could be a month out before I could get that. Someone had sent a question in prior about finding a DOT provider for conducting physicals and stuff like that. The FMCSA has a national registry, and I'll get these to Chad and Wade so they can send them out to webinar participants on that. But what I would do is I would go to the national registry that has all of the pre-qualified DOT providers, and they have a zip code search in there. So you'd put your zip code in, and then you would find a qualified provider in your area, and that's where you want to send your drivers. I encourage you to do that system instead of you'll see these signs on fences. We do DOT physicals, or billboards or something like that. Go with one from the National Registry that the FMCSA has already vetted, and that will make sure, because the key thing on that DOT medical card is the verification number from the National Registry. That's what they're going to check against. So if you go to some fly by night, doctor that says, "Hey, I do DOT physicals," and they're not in that register, then that DOT medical card is invalid. Also consider getting long form physicals from your drivers, because they get both. They get the card and they get the long form physical. And you want to look at the long form physical if your driver, let's say your driver is over 65 years old, or your driver has a medical condition, they're still able to drive and pass the DOT physical, but you need to know, do I need to make some accommodations because of what's on the long form, which may not be on the medical card. So
John, we have a couple questions here in the chat, if you don't mind answering. We've got Sam saying, are there certain things that must be included in a road test?
yeah, so in a road test, you really want the road test to match the type of vehicle that you're giving. So that's the difficulty. I'm telling you to do a Google search for a road test. Well, what's the number one problem with anytime we do a Google search for this type of operation? Everything's for tractors and trailers. And you're in, I think you said it was Sam, and Sam's going, well, I don't have tractors and trailers. So you may have to modify that road test. You basically want to make sure that you have the VIN number identified and a unit number. So let's say we have it truck 100, and then you got the VIN number on the road test, and then you have the driver's name, it's John Davis on there, and you're really wanting to go through the different areas of the truck. So if it's a standard road test, which again in our industry is usually for tractors, you got to modify it so it makes sense for your type of operation. Where you may go, okay, I don't need this block of questions because it's on a tractor. It doesn't even matter. But can the driver, work the horn? Do they know the wipers? Do they use the turn signals? Do they know where the emergency equipment is? That's another thing that gets these type of operations in trouble. I know it sounds crazy. The most frequent violation that I see across the country is for a fire extinguisher. Okay, well, where's a fire extinguisher in a box truck? A lot of times it's under the passenger seat, the bench seat. And okay, how do I get the violation? Well, the fire extinguisher is not charged. It's not secure in the buckle. The buckle is undone. The helper has kicked it. The driver doesn't know where it is, but it's just really going through the different areas that they know how to drive that portion of the vehicle.
Is there some kind of a template that can be downloaded or sent out to the people watching this that an insurance company or a DOT auditor would like to, or FMCSA would like to basically see, like the crucial questions answered on a road test like that?
What I'll do is I will create you one for the participants for this webinar, and I'll just email it to you if you will just email it to the participants.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. We can certainly
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah,
We have
because
one.
that,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was just going to go to another question, but finish your thought.
Yep. Nope, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So we have Gabriella, who said, if you had to recommend 3 compliance practices every HR team should implement immediately, what would they be?
Definitely get the driver qualification files squared away with what I'm telling you. And the other thing that I didn't mention on a driver qualification file, to pass an audit with flying colors, is to have the different items in the driver qualification file and then put a checklist in the front of it. So in this world, you can go one of two ways. You can do paper files, which is a little harder to manage, or you can do electronic files like Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. But if you'll get with the checklist and then include the things I'm talking about in the driver file. If you think from an auditor, the number one thing I looked at as an auditor were all the files exactly the same. If I answered that question, let's say a company had 40 drivers. If I looked through 10 files, they had a checklist, they were all in the same order, and they were complete. Guess what? I did not look at the other 30 files. If they didn't have any of that, here was a common experience. I would go into an office and I would look at some driver files and I would say, where's the motor vehicle record? And they would have this basket on their desk. Well, all my motor vehicle records are over in that basket. When I had to start doing that to go, okay, well, it's not in the driver file, it's over here or over there or whatever, that caused major issues with the audit process. And then the last thing on this is making sure that you are tracking the expiration date of the license and the medical card with enough time that you're not going to get in violation on that. So obviously driver files. Then there is the maintenance files, which is the next biggest thing on that. And again, it's the same type of organization. A lot of folks do it in a paper file, and you've got to have a sheet on the front of it, which is a chronological order of what you have done on your truck. Whether you lease it or own it or whatever, it requires certain information on the front of it that says, okay, it is unit number 100. It is a 2025 Mack truck, its gross vehicle weight, the VIN number, and the tire size. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the tire size has to be on that piece of paper. Chad and Wade, I'll send this form also to make sure that they all have it. So that's in the very beginning of the file, and making sure that we have a copy of the annual inspection in there. And then all you do is it's in chronological order of everything that you have behind that. So the file work is the big things right here. And then the third piece of file work that gets motor carriers in a lot of trouble with the insurance company and the FMCSA is not keeping accurate accident records. So you have to have a DOT accident register, whether you have an accident or not. If I come in as a DOT officer and I audit you and I ask you for your DOT accident record, and what comes out of your mouth is, I haven't had any, I'm still going to ask you for that. If you don't have it, I'm going to give you a violation for it. So make sure you have the DOT accident register. And then you want an all other accident register. That's the register that is, my driver backed into a pole. I put ruts in the grass. I did this. I did that. From the insurance company, they want to see that you're looking at that to see if you are looking at the frequency and severity of those accidents to determine whether or not you are addressing those.
Is there a certain place or a certain template or format to log these registers, or an online place, or is it just like a spreadsheet that we could create that documents any incidences or required information for them?
Unfortunately, that's why my company exists. There is nothing. And this is the frustrating thing about the industry is you can do Google searches on what I need to have in my driver file. And if you did it, you could get 50 different answers. Same thing with the maintenance files and all that. So what I'm going to do is let me get to you guys some forms and some paperwork, so at least you can get your files organized on what should be in there and all that. So if I give you the driver file checklist, then you'll know exactly what goes in it. And then you just put it in that order and then create every single. Same thing with the maintenance file, and same thing with the DOT accident register. How about that?
Love it.
That sounds good. I'm like overwhelmed already. I mean, this
I
is
know, and I'm only
not
34
stuff
minutes
that,
in.
yeah, this is not stuff that I really like to deal with or want to deal with, but I know it's important. And I know we chatted a little bit before we hopped on here, and John told me that this is what MyFleet.AI does. They, amongst a bunch of other things, which I hope you go into before we get off this webinar, because I think everyone needs to hear about it. And for a pretty low price, too. I mean, we're not getting any kickbacks from this at all, but I think this is like fate for us to be having this webinar with you right now, for me anyway, because I'm ready to sign on the dotted line and get this off of my plate, off my operations manager plate, and make my insurance company happy.
And we do
Have a
have some
safer.
of John's resources in Tighten Up training too. There's some driver courses in there, and I would love to get basically an entire course in there on all of these things with the resources and the templates and things like that.
I'll be
This is good
happy to
stuff.
do that because it's one thing to use a third party safety company, and this is how I explain it to motor carriers. I can do 90% of everything. That's including the driver training, all the compliance stuff. But to really run an effective safety program, I still need 10% from operations. We got all the data, we monitor the cameras, the ELD, the compliance, the driver coaching, the training, and all that. But if I can get buy-in from the managers to say, look, you're not going to spend hours doing this, but you can help me out with a driver on whatever the issue is, then that really makes it successful. So,
Yeah, 100%.
all right. Back to the drug and alcohol. So if you operate with a non-CDL driver and you're under 26,000 pounds, you're not required to have, by the regulations, a drug and alcohol program. But I'm telling you from your insurance company and the lawyer on the billboard, you really need to institute a drug and alcohol program. You do on that. So it's again, you can do a search. The safest thing to do is to find a drug and alcohol consortium. Again, going back to the National Registry, you can find out who those people are for your jurisdiction with your zip code. Call them up, say, look, I think I need to have this. Um, the good thing if you're have non-CDL drivers, like if you look here, if you have CDL drivers, you have to do 50% drug and 10% alcohol. You don't have to follow those percentages with non-CDL drivers. Now, if you're an operation that has a combination of both, this is another thing that gets folks in trouble. You can't have non-CDL drivers and CDL drivers in the same pool. You would have to have two different pools. So let's say you had 10 CDL drivers. You would tell your drug and alcohol consortium that you're going to pull these 10, my randoms from these 10 drivers in this pool. And then I have 10 non-CDL drivers. You're going to pull randoms from that pool. You cannot mix those two together or you'll be non-compliant. If you have CDL drivers, even a Class B CDL driver, you have to be in the clearinghouse. And I could talk 3 or 4 hours on the clearinghouse. It is a nightmare on this. So if you have a CDL driver, they have to be in the clearinghouse. So you have a couple of workflows here. A lot of the drug and alcohol consortiums will handle the clearinghouse for you. They're going to charge you for that. So you can go that method, or you can set up your own clearinghouse account, which is a little bit more labor intensive, and that can be the way that you go with that. But basically, the nuts and bolts of the clearinghouse, if you have a CDL driver, is you must follow their program format using their release, and you must do the clearinghouse at the time of hiring to get that done. The regulations talk about post-accident drug and alcohol testing. So again, even though you don't have CDL drivers, you dang sure better get post-accident drug and alcohol testing done after an accident, regardless of classification of the license. Again, why? The lawyer on the billboard is in the courtroom going, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the driver most likely was impaired at the time of the accident. How does he say that? Because we didn't do a drug and alcohol test after the accident. So if it's a vehicle accident with bodily injury and it's a non-CDL driver, I would send the driver for a drug and alcohol test, hoping it's clean, everything's good. and you got that covered. But that's your get out of jail free card in litigation.
So if the driver was impaired or failed the drug test, what does that look like for the company and the driver? And
Good point. Good point. So I had this discussion with having cameras in the trucks. So me as your risk manager and safety expert, I highly recommend that you have forward and driver facing cameras in every truck that you have, because it is the cheapest safety director to have in your operation. It's the exact same thing with this, to make sure that you have this stuff covered. Did I answer that question?
no, it was kind of like if the driver was impaired, you sent him to get the drug test, there was
Yeah,
the
okay, that's
accident.
that's
What,
where
like
that's where I
who,
was
I
going.
mean, does it still fall on the company? Does it all fall on the driver?
Yeah, so it does fall on the company. Everything falls on the company and the driver. So your driver's going to jail, possibly facing criminal homicide charges for being impaired. You are reporting it to your insurance company. And so the key thing, that's where I was going with the cameras. The key thing on the cameras and this, it's better to know the very worst of a situation from day one than 2 years later in a deposition. So let's say your driver pops positive, and you know that. It's better that your insurance company knows it today than they go through a bunch of litigation, or they're dealing with not knowing that they were impaired.
I have a question. So, say the driver gets into an accident. You have a drug and alcohol program. They're tested when they're hired. You do the randomized. They get into an accident. Say, there's a fatality, and they test positive for cannabis, and that stays in. That can stay in a system for 30 days. Would that driver still potentially be facing a vehicular homicide charge, because they could argue he was intoxicated even if he smoked weed 3 weeks prior?
That is a possibility. So
It's good to
what
let
you're going,
our
what
drivers
you're,
know that, and really
yeah.
use that as the seriousness of that.
Here's here's a common situation with this type of operation. I've got three human beings on a bench seat inside of a box truck. I've got a driver and two loaders in there. The two loaders are not worried about their license or medical card or anything like that. So I had this situation happen with a company down in South Florida, where the driver gets pulled over and a backpack is searched, and there is marijuana in the backpack from one of the loaders. So that put the driver out of service. I had to do a data queue and say it didn't have to do with the driver. But these are common situations that go on in this industry that we don't think about. But I want you to think about them, and y'all are asking good questions about that, because your exposure to this is massive. We're talking about, if you think about insurance, and let's say you have an insurance policy with a $750,000 limit, and your driver is impaired, and you get a verdict for $25 million, they're coming after you with this stuff above that limit. So having the awareness, talking to your drivers, talking to your loaders, the driver, the way I look at it, with a driver and two loaders in the truck, the driver is the captain of that ship. And, I need to talk to my loaders and make sure that, um, we don't have anything in the truck that's illegal, that we're not, smoking stuff, that we're not doing this. Same thing with prescription drugs, that can get operation in trouble. I hate to be
No,
raining
this
down
is
on it.
this is great, and that kind of leads into a question that somebody had just posted. Would anything change if the driver has a medical marijuana card and a signed release with the company? But it sounds like even a prescription could trigger some issues.
Excellent question. I'm glad that question was asked, so that we are absolutely clear. It does not matter if the state and jurisdiction you live in allows a medical marijuana card or recreational marijuana. A commercial driver cannot use cannabis, period. Here's where drivers get in trouble. with that. I don't smoke marijuana. I go to the True Leaf store or whatever, and I use CBD products. All of that will pop positive on a drug test on that.
And when you say commercial driver, is that just CDL or what about for?
No, that's everybody. The
So local moving drivers, that's, I think there's a lot of moving companies listening to this right now about to have some conversations.
They're
well,
like, we're
and
gonna go out of business. We're not gonna have anybody.
that's why I'm telling you the risk, but I know this type of operation that's the main problem. It's like you know you don't see me saying do criminal background checks because I don't know if we'd have anybody in this industry on that. So I know what it is. Uh, yes, I would love for you to have a program that says, okay, you can't smoke marijuana, you can't use CBD products. And I'm talking about the CBD lotion that a lot of drivers put on their back and their shoulders and all that will pop positive. So these are dangers and pitfalls that are you as the owner of the company are looking at, but there's a huge problem on finding drivers to work in this industry.
Now, say you have all of these things in place. You've got a really, strict drug and alcohol policy. You do random testing. You do upon hire testing, background checks. All this stuff. You're doing everything right as a company.
Hmm.
And a driver makes a bad decision. Smokes some weed with his friends one day, has a move. Later in a week or
Hmm.
in a few days, whatever, gets into this accident and tests positive. Could that come back on the company if you were otherwise doing everything right?
Yeah, but here's the difference. Think about litigation, this is where all this goes. Is think about your company and your company employees are in a courtroom facing 12 of your peers. If you are the owner of the company and you're in the witness stand and you say, we have a drug and alcohol program, we go through this consortium, we have a no tolerance policy, that is a totally different outcome than the company owner that's in the same witness box going, yeah, it's the moving industry. Yeah, this is, that lackadaisical you may still get a verdict, but you're not going to get a $25 million verdict. That's the difference. That's the difference right there. I know it's a tough one. This is one
Yeah.
of the toughest ones here in our industry. The FMCSA is considering it, and they need to. We have what I believe 33 to 35 states in the United States that have legalized marijuana in some format. The problem that they have is they don't have a roadside testing machine. To answer your question a minute ago, did they smoke today, an hour ago, or did they smoke 20 days ago?
Hmm.
That's where the problem is. If they could solve that problem there, then I think there's a way to get to the point that the industry could legalize this and do it. I mean,
What other prescriptions would potentially cause an issue? Like you mentioned that, they may be doing everything above board. Maybe they've got depression or some other thing. I mean, I'm curious what other prescriptions are going to cause problems.
so the first problem with prescriptions is driver putting prescriptions in unlabeled containers or bottles. That's the first problem. Second
Okay.
problem is think about our industry. We're movers. We pick up heavy stuff. What are common things that people that work in that industry do? They take painkillers, Oxycontin, Valium, those type of things. All of those will get you in trouble with
And
with
even
that.
if they've got is there a list somewhere? Like if they are legally prescribed by a doctor for some ailment that, I'm curious to just know what's on. It's almost like I think of like the Olympics where they do the drug test and they have the list of all
Correct.
the banned
Correct.
substances. What's the banned substance? Where can we find the banned substance list for drivers?
It's on the DOT website. There's 5 categories. I mean, if you think about it, it's like cocaine, Oxycontin,
Sure. All
marijuana.
the illegal ones, I
Yeah,
guess.
all of the Schedule One, illegal ones. That's it. So
I'm more thinking like if they do have a valid prescription, though, maybe it's some mental thing that they have under control, but it's written
There's
by a
where the
doctor.
there's where the issue is. Is it a valid prescription that they can take it while they're behind the wheel driving down the interstate, or is it a valid prescription to take it when they're at the hotel at the end of the day? There's the difference.
But both could show up as positive on a drug test.
Good, good, good. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a toughie.
Duffy.
One thing I did hear you say that kind of was news to me.
Hmm.
I just found out you can data queue some of your violations, right? It's kind of like you can debate them on with, is it CSA score or FMCSA website or whatever it is, but you get a over the weight or ELD or out of service, whatever it is violation, you can dispute it if you actually and then you can win and get it removed
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. So the data queue process, let me just solve a couple of myths on that. So I have a DOT officer that works for me, been doing it 35 years. There's an art to it. So you can challenge roadside violations um, that occur, but you have to have documentation on why the officer is wrong. So you just can't challenge and say, I disagree with this. You were being mean to me on the side of the road. That's not the way it works. It's got to be, I looked at the regulation on the violation that you gave me. I think the officer misinterpreted it, or I have documentation. I'll give you an example. I had one last week that I won where they said that the wheel seal was leaking, and they gave him a violation for that. But the mechanic came out to the inspection station, took it apart in front of the officer, showed it was not leaking. The officer still wouldn't change the violation. We data queued it, and then he took it off after that. So there's an art to it, but I could do a whole nother webinar just on that too. So
Did you guys offer that service through
yes, yeah.
MyFleet? Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we're successful with DOT operations is there's two things. I'm trying to get your drivers not to have the violation, but in reality, violations are going to happen that are outside of the course and scope of the driver doing anything. And then I have to have the DOT guy that works for me to go challenge the violation to try to remove them. It's a dance between those two things.
Right. Makes sense.
So, um, remember, I mentioned this earlier, enclosed cargoes to make sure that it is secure. You can get violations for that. And then I can probably spend an hour talking about hours of service. All right. So with our type of operation we're talking today, a lot of the times we are doing local moves. Okay. So an ELD is not required. If you think about the short haul exemption that's using paper logs or a timesheet, you got the first thing is the driver has to start and stop at the same location. So let's say you have your warehouse um, in Tampa, and that's where your trucks are parked. And okay, your drivers are going to go move the household goods and come back to that same terminal. Then you can use that exemption. You can't use it when you're out on the road and you're trying to extend your day and stuff like that. I have a lot of reasons for this, and it is a cost, but we're talking about best practices. If you're the type of operation that does a mixture of local moves and over the road moves that are over the 150 air miles or crossing state lines, I highly recommend that you use electronic logging devices to keep you out of trouble. And this can be problematic. I had this happen with one of my moving companies the other day. He goes, well, I rent trucks all the time. How do I get the gateway from the ELD in the truck? And I go, that is problematic of putting it in, my short-term rentals on doing that. You're starting to get the theme of a lot of this, right, Chad? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different nuances to this industry that makes it tough. But if I wanted to survive the FMCSA and I wanted to survive my insurance company auditing me, the safest thing to do is to put an electronic logging device in there. And I do have companies that do that. It does a couple of things. It makes sure that you've got your time tracked with your drivers. It pinpoints their location. Instead of calling them to find out where they are on their load, you can just open the ELD dashboard to see where they're at as the customer's calling you and going, where the heck is my driver at? Oh, let me look real quick. They're right here. And then thinking about if the requirements, okay, it's one thing to read an odometer reading on your mileage from your trucks, but how many miles did you drive in Florida versus Georgia versus South Carolina versus North Carolina? Those type of things that you may not be thinking about that will make your life easier.
Yeah, a couple of the violations we got were for the drivers not certifying their logs before
Mm-hmm.
hitting the road again. And I see where it can be confusing because they're local for X amount of days and then they go all over the road. And,
Correct.
what's the best practices on that?
Yeah, so if you use electronic logging devices, the more popular ones like Motive or Samsara or something like that, they build into their software what's called a driver walkthrough. And usually, when you go into one of those ELD systems, you go into the administrative dashboard and you go to the driver app tab, and it'll give you some type of dialogue that says create a new walkthrough. And when you create that walkthrough, what you're doing is you are forcing your drivers to do certain things like put in the bill of lading or shipment document. That is a required thing that needs to be done. And then the second thing that you usually put in there is the driver must certify their logs before they go on duty. So with that workflow, let's say your driver was off a couple of days and they get in the truck, that dialog box would come out and go, hey, John Davis, you have 2 logs you need to certify because I am not going to serve the on duty line until you do that. They can't skip it. So
Nice.
that's what you want to look at is if you're using an electronic logging device to do that and then shy away from these fly by night ELDs. I got a brother that came out with an ELD and all that. That can be problematic for you. If you'll just get in the habit, if you make the business decision to do an ELD, and then even though the driver is running local, you can change the rule set on the driver. Like in Motive or Samsara, you can set up 2 rule sets for the driver. One of the rule sets is a short haul exemption that runs like that 150-mile air exemption. So you choose that for the local runs, and then that one is no 30-minute break, and they have a 14-hour window to operate in. Then your driver goes, or you look at it and go, driver, I need you to drive from Tampa to Atlanta, Georgia. Then you change their rule set, and the driver can choose it also. They can change their rule set to over the road, which requires a 30-minute break and keeps you compliant. So just learning the technology can help you go through some of those different things.
And do you guys help the company set that up with MyFleet? Okay, cool.
Like I said, I could talk a good hour and give lots of examples and all this. Where the number one problem is the company that makes the business decision. I'm not putting ELDs in. I know I have 8 days a month that I'm allowed to use paper logs. You do the paper logs, the driver doesn't do them right, you don't correct it, you don't keep it, and then you get an audit from the FMCSA or the insurance company, and they come in and go, where's your paperwork for this trip and that trip? What a lot of people don't know is we have 300,000 license plate readers in the United States. So before a DOT operation comes in to see you, they pull data from those 300,000 license plate readers. And a lot of the areas of the country, we have rolling weigh stations. So your truck doesn't even have a transponder in it, but it has a license plate reader and it has a weigh station that your driver just drove over. So they collect all that data and then come to you and they go, all right, now produce all the paperwork. I need to see this trip. My license plate reader showed you crossed this area, and you don't have the paperwork for that. That's where you get your conditional rating. That's where you lose your insurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no way around it. Don't try to get creative. It's better just to be by
Not
the
in
book
today's
and
world. Not in
yeah.
today's world. They are figuring this stuff out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's getting a lot. Um, so again, this stuff can spiral on you, and I know I'm at the end of my time here. It's just the more points you get, the worse your CSA scores get. Your insurance company is not going to be happy. And here's the reality of the experience. You go up for your renewal. So when you're doing an insurance renewal, it's 120 to 90 days out from your renewal date. They pull what's called a cab report on you. And it's not a cab report for the registration, it's a cab report with all your safety information. And if you don't hit a certain threshold, then they're making the business decision, am I going to insure this company or how much more I'm going to charge them? And that's where the crux of the problem is.
Have you ever seen, let's say, companies working with you where you get them all dialed in, you have the documentation, the driver folders, they're compliant, the driver safety training, yada yada yada. Have you ever seen them give you a discount on your insurance?
Yes, yes, I've seen that happen because the scores went the opposite way. So I'll give you an example. We have a, DOT client with 550 drivers, monster operation. They had 20 people in their safety department, and they had 3 alerts on their basic scores. And then we got all 3 alerts under the threshold limit. Not only did it do what I think Chad said earlier, they stopped getting pulled into way stations. That was the first thing, which meant that their cost of roadside violations dropped exponentially. Then they were offered new insurance programs that they didn't even know they were available for, because that that can be problematic in our industry we're talking about here. And then the rates went down. So that's
Sounds like they probably could have also got rid of some of their safety managers too.
they got
Save
rid
some money
of
there.
80% of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you don't want to be salesy or anything, but I think if you could take just a couple minutes and talk about everything that MyFleet AI does. I know you didn't get through your whole presentation just so they can kind of get a general idea of what you guys do.
Yeah. So the real thing that we do is I come from the insurance world, I come from the auditing world, I come from the DOT world, and I've been doing that for over 35 years. And I keep seeing the same problem over and over. So with this industry, what's the problems we've been talking about today? Well, what do I need in my driver file? What do I need in my maintenance file and all that? What the overall problem is my motor carriers didn't know what they should be doing until an audit happened. The audit went bad, and they didn't have the resources or time to accomplish the things that they did. So we build a system, and we bring in the electronic logging device information, we bring in camera information, we bring in the DOT compliance stuff, the roadside inspections, we handle the accidents, we do all this. We identify all the problems. And there's a lot of safety vendors in the world that they offer that service right there. They don't offer what we have. I don't have a competitor because we do part two. We talk to your drivers. We fix the problems. We have the integrated training system. We coach your drivers. We do the curative training with your drivers. We do the progressive disciplinary actions with your drivers. We do the data queue with your violations. We handle the accidents. We just make sure that everything is done correctly, number one, and then that it's all documented. So when it comes to an insurance audit or an FMCSA audit, you have a dashboard and they go, I need to see all your driver files. Great. Here's the login. Here's my computer. Knock yourself out. You need a coffee while you're waiting? That's the difference. You're not going through a bunch of different files and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that sounds amazing. I mean, it's definitely something I'm interested in because it's something we are not excelling at, and I'd rather take it out of our hands and put it into the experts' hands. I can tell you how to move a piece of furniture, but
Yeah.
when it comes to a safety audit, I'm lost. So, and I don't know if you want to. I mean, the price you told me, I don't know if you want to share that because I think it's freaking cheap or
Yeah,
affordable.
we worked out a deal, and this is thankful for this organization with Titan, is they are working with us. As you see, as I did in this presentation, I want to teach, whether you use us or not, I want to teach you guys on what you should be doing and how you do it. But our pricing model is per truck, $36 per truck per month subscription. and it just makes it easier. We chose the truck model because it's easier for us to manage that. An operation could have double the number of drivers and the driver training, but that doesn't matter. The other key thing is training in this industry is horrible because it's all for tractor trailers and no one builds training for the type of operation. So the training I do is if it's going to be on pre-trip inspections, it needs to be on a 26-foot box truck and not tractor trailers. That it makes sense for this type of operation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great price, and just to have that protection. I mean, it's just insurance if something were to happen, and you're making your company safer. It's better for everybody who's at your company and all the other drivers on the road. I mean, we are really employing people that want to pick up heavy stuff and put it down all day
There's
to drive
something mentally
tanks
wrong
down
with
the
them.
road, to
Yeah,
drive 25,000 pound tanks down the road.
yeah,
It's a recipe for disaster. It's not if it happens, it's when.
right.
Yeah.
And this is one of those unique industry niches. Tow truck companies are another one that just has so many issues just from the hiring drivers, drug testing drivers, and all that. It just makes it really hard to manage on that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I mean, $36 a truck. I mean, most companies are paying $1,000 or more a truck. I mean, what, $36 a month extra on top of that for this kind of reassurance and peace of mind that could also probably bring that down significantly. I mean, you look at it as an investment, as how it will save you money in your annual insurance renewals, and let alone keep you out of trouble. That could be very expensive. I mean, it seems like a no
Hmm.
brainer.
Yeah, it's nice to have a DOT officer just a phone call away. And he knows all, he was the head of the state of Oregon's DOT program. So if I need him to call the head of the DOT in Missouri, he picks up the phone and calls them and says, this is an issue.
I have one question for you because we ran into it. We had a truck that was rated for 36,000 pounds, I think it is, or is it 32,000 pounds? But it had they re-rated the weight on it. They put a sticker on the door over that 30 whatever thousand pounds it was,
We
and
had
we
the
got
same
stopped
issue.
at a weigh station. The truck was empty. It only weighed whatever it would weigh empty. But they tried to ground us, and I literally had to fight with the DOT officer for 4 hours trying to convince him that, it was okay. And he actually let me go. We got some paperwork from the guy we bought the truck from, sent it over to him, and he was like, all right, I'll let you go. But is that legal or?
Yeah, so that happens a lot. It happens in the situation you just said, and it happens with my companies that transport gooseneck trailers. So they look at the registration and what's printed on the registration. And then if the registration said 36,000 pounds, regardless of what that sticker said, they're going to say you have the wrong classification in here. I've had the violations and I have convinced officers to do what you did, which was what you should have done. And then I've had others that said, no, I'm sorry, that I'm going with the gross vehicle weight that's on the registration on that.
Yeah, well, our registration, I'm pretty positive, reads the 26,000 pounds GVW. It's just the
Okay.
sticker. They could see the old sticker on the door with the new
Okay.
sticker put over it, and they went off the old one instead of the new
Okay.
one.
Yeah, and that's where it happens with a lot of my companies that use trailers. They will go back to the manufacturer and re-rate the trailer to change the plate on the side of the trailer, where the trailer could say 17,000 pounds and they'll say it's really 15,000 pounds.
Yeah, and my argument was like, okay, so the truck's not overweight, it's empty. And you're telling me I have a truck, the driver's driving a truck that has better brakes, better, it could handle more or whatever. You're telling me it's unsafe to drive that truck if it's not overweight. I don't see the argument.
Well, and that's what the data queue process is all about. And it can be difficult because when you do a data queue, it goes back to the original officer. So what my DOT officer does is he knows that, and sometimes he'll just call that officer's boss and say, hey, I think your officer screwed up here and all this. And so it's just like everything in the world is in business. It's just developing those relationships behind the scenes that can get things done. Now you did what you were supposed to do is you kept that officer on the phone until you got your
But no,
way.
I got to his supervisor, and I was blowing him up for 4 hours straight. He couldn't
Yeah,
get, he couldn't get rid of me. I wasn't letting it go.
yeah, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Cool. We have one last little question and then we got to wrap it up because I think it's going to kick us all off in 4 minutes. But Hans, and I think this may have been answered earlier, but let's clarify. How does this work when you mainly operate in 150-mile radius, but do longer distance a few times a month? Is there a paper log for these specific circumstances? And
Yes.
if you don't have Samsara on, Samsara does this with their ELDs. And I recommend that for a lot of these other reasons that John talked about, but go ahead and answer.
So the FMCSA regulations allow for 8 days a month to be paper logs. So if it's just intermittent, a couple of days a month, you can use a paper log.
I didn't
Here's
know
where
that.
the problem with paper logs is. I get this all the time, especially in my DOT operations. I'll tell the driver to use a paper log, and the driver will say something like this: if I have to run paper today, I ain't running. And because he doesn't know how to fill out a paper log. So just understand that if you have a paper log, have an understanding of how to fill it out and that they do that. But you are allowed under the regulations to use a paper log 8 days a month, but you got to keep them, right? And you got to keep them for 6 months. That's what the regulation states. So when I do a compliance review and I go in and talk to a company, it could be, I want Chad's logs from November of 2025, the whole month. That's what they're doing. They're getting the whole month's log. So you have to cover that entire month.
John, how can people get a hold of you if they're interested in signing up for your program or just learning some more information about what you offer?
Sales at MyFleet.AI.com.
Well, this has been great. This was super informative, and I definitely plan to start working with you on my side, and I know Chad does too. Because
same.
These if you've ever been audited by the DOT, which we were a couple of years ago, it is not fun, and neither is the annual insurance audits. So
No,
this is a great service.
Yeah, both of those entities pick on these companies because they know it's easy pickings. It's just because of the problems we've talked about today. So I'm here. I will send some paperwork to you guys if you can get it out to the participants and all that. And then just I'm thinking of some training things for the Titan library. Let's work on some of those so that these folks have more of this information. I really appreciate y'all letting me do this. I know it's a lot, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah. I love what you're doing, John. I think honestly, it was like fate for me. I literally had my audit like last Thursday. So
Mhm.
it's fresh in my mind. I got to solve this problem. And I think I found my solution. So thanks for
Awesome.
coming on and shedding light on this stuff. And it's, yeah, great
Yep.
service.
All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you
All right,
guys.
guys.
All right. Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye
Tighten
bye.
up.